Okay, welcome everybody to the September IASA event. We have an interesting lineup this evening where David Reichental and Dan Galavan will be speaking about business processes and the value of those business processes. They may be more valuable than bitcoins. We'll explain a little bit more about that later on. So we have these events once a month, usually the last Thursday of every month. This is our first session since the summer, so welcome all here. We tend to have a number of themes for these events, and those themes are based around the IASA pillars, the 5 pillars of business technology strategy, human dynamics, design, IT governance and environment, and the quality attributes. We see architects as the technologists for business, and a lot of our talks and conversations at these sessions are around enabling you as architects or aspiring architects to having those skills. Our IT body of knowledge that we have within IASA are categorized around those 5 pillars. The pillars that Dan and David will be talking about is the business technology strategy, some of the environments, probably a bit about human dynamics, and about the design work that they've done on their respective projects. So next month we hope to have, or we plan to have, 2 students or PhD students from Limerick University, and they're going to cover 2 very interesting topics around architectural significant requirements. Very little research has been done outside of the US on architectural significant requirements, i.e. what requirements are important and will have an impact on their design. So Fen Xing is going to present her work so far in her research about what architectural significant requirements and how they impact the architectural design. The next one is Pat O'Donoghue has done some work and did a survey within the Irish financial services sector and to identify what motivates senior IT staff. So I think that will be quite interesting to see why people stick around, what motivates them in their work, and how it relates to IT. Then in November, we hope to have Lawrence O'Byrne, who is an author in the top 100 Amazon. He's a fictional author, but he's also got a technology and marketing background. So he's going to talk about, well, how can IT architects help the marketing people in their online environment. Plus, he's going to talk about how we can apply social networks to communicate either internally in business or outside. His current following list is about 300,000 people on Twitter and other social networks. So he has some good knowledge of how to use it and how to apply it, and also kind of guidelines of how you can overuse it and annoy your followers. So I look forward to talking to you later on at the break, and I hope you all enjoy both David and Dan. So I present David Reichental, who is a friend of the Society, to present on his topic of business processes. Thank you, David. Here's the mic. To this now, David. Thank you very much.
Okay, very good. Process migration. Good evening, everyone. So who am I? I'm David Reichental. I've been at this for software programming and design and architecture for over 20 years. I've dealt with companies as diverse as Shell Oil, Bank of Ireland, Microsoft in all different capacities. I've been an individual programmer. I've run teams. Currently, I'm on a project with Zurich in BlackRock. So, what's it all about? Although people think they're creating an application, what they're really doing, in fact, is creating a new process. And that's served by the new application. This change in process can be difficult for the various sponsors and stakeholders because everyone has a different perspective of what they're getting. And in the end, they all think they're just getting a new application wrapped in a shiny package. Now, what we're not talking about is the next big thing of Facebook or a Twitter or something where nobody has any preconceived ideas of what's going on and it's all kind of guesswork and we'll throw this into the pot. This is about business processes that people use every day, buying, selling stock, shares, whatever business you're involved in. So I'll start off with some sobering statistics of the success rate or not success rate of a lot of products or projects. So McKinsey did a survey in 2012, and they took, as you can see, shy of 5,500 projects with a budget of around 15 million. What percentage of those do you think went badly wrong that they could threaten the very existence of the company? Anyone have any guesses? High, low? Okay, half's a good guess, and hopefully it never is as bad as half. So it's 70%. But 70%, bear in mind that that's saying that the business will collapse as a result. 1 in 5, that's shy of 1 in 5, that on these projects the whole business will collapse. That's a very, very big number where the whole company is going to go as a result of this project. What percentage went over budget? Somebody might have, there might be better guesses on that one. That's probably true. The actual one is 45%. So that's still big. And if we're talking about $15 million project here going over budget, that's obviously a significant amount if they're talking of over budget on 15 million. They're not talking about 50,000 over here. And I would contend actually on the smaller projects they tend to go over even much more. Jenica is a Chicago-based consultancy firm, and they interviewed a few people about projects that fail. So because of, people on the project, these 600 people, because of fuzzy business objectives, out-of-sync stakeholders, and excessive rework of the idea and going back, how many of those participants thought the project was going to fail? Guess. This was surprising. 3/4 of people thought the project was going to fail. So IBM did one. Don't worry, it's not slide after slide of this. What percentage of projects met schedule, budget, and quality goals? Okay, let's see. 40%. So less than half actually achieved what they set out to achieve in going ahead with the project. And this, I think, is the last one. This is actually an important one. What underestimation of complexity listed as a factor? I won't ask you to guess, I'll just... A third. So a third of people sort of said, well, we didn't realize how complex this thing was when we got into it in the first place. The biggest barriers were cited as people, essentially. So as you can see there, changing attitudes, 58%, corporate culture was 49%, lack of support from senior management, here, do this, and off people went, and nobody gave them the support, whether it be in financial or getting access to the right resources. Okay, so a typical example would be, so you have a simple conversion of a spreadsheet into a database. It happens in loads of organizations as this spreadsheet. It was created in accounts when the company was first formed. There might have been 5 people in the whole company. And it's grown, and sort of the transactions in it when it started were maybe 1 a week or on a hand, but it's grown over the years. Now there's 10 people alone just in accounts, never mind in the whole company. There's potentially hundreds of transactions going through it a month, and the business rules and workflow are known and encapsulated within a few people, the knowledge for the application. So in this, there's different sponsors and stakeholders and clients. Each of them has a different perspective of what they're going to get from it. So management typically want a quick solution to the problem. They possibly see it as very simple and want to increase accuracy and productivity or other abstract things. Finance, along with management, want it within budget. And this may be based on incorrect timings, based on the assumptions that they have of how the project will pan out. Project managers are interested in what resources they have available from a pool of conflicting projects and timelines. Developers are interested in getting a fixed spec for the project and possibly using some new technologies. And the consumer always has an overambitious expectation of what the solution should do. That might go along with some resistance to the change that may be involved, and a jaundiced view of what management has promised and been able to deliver in the past. One of the problems here is actually some of the good tools we use. And it's not only, I'm picking on Microsoft's Excel and Access and Word and all these. These applications, it's often forgotten how sophisticated and capable they are. With Microsoft, to create an ad hoc app that filters data, sorts data, puts formulas in, makes some charts, is dynamic, it's achievable. Pretty much anyone who's used Excel can do it. If you also tie that in with the fact that managers and users are more tolerant of these applications in terms of the layout, potentially the validation, the security, they get you get a very powerful product, and people are willing to accept its downfalls, which they may not be able to accept in an application that's written. Remember that Word, Excel, and Access, they're the results of tens of thousands of hours of development and many versions to try and hone in on what people and business actually want. So it's complex enough to try and get that functionality. So in our spreadsheet example that we have, maybe a company that deals with stocks and shares. They have a line per customer. transaction, they total, they do breakdowns based on particular trades. The data is versioned for reporting purposes, and differences between periods and months on the spreadsheet are very simple to do in Excel. You copy the line from one month into a new tab, and you copy this month into a new tab, and you can just do a simple subtraction, and you can see the difference of whether the share has gone up or down in the month. And then if somebody wants to see that in accounts or wherever around the business, they open up the spreadsheet and it shows the latest piece of data and the latest information. So all of those things are very simple to do in Excel. Versioning, very simple. You do save as, and you've got a new version of the data. You do that based on some intrinsic business rule that you may have in your head. When this or that changes, I need to have a new version to do it, and you save it. And you probably save it with the name and the date attached or something like that. To do a ad hoc report in Excel by copying and pasting formulas, very, very simple again. But as everyone knows, to put this kind of functionality into an application is not impossible, obviously, but it is fairly challenging. And for the simplicity that seems to happen in Excel or Word or Access in terms of doing these things, when you write a proper business application, that's very difficult to achieve properly, that is. So what to do? So even though some of these tasks are difficult from an architectural and software engineering perspective, they're certainly not insurmountable. However, what is far more difficult, and my contention, is that one of the main hurdles and reasons for failure in re-engineering software is that the process needs to be re-engineered first. Famously, Henry Ford says that if he asked his customers what they wanted, they would have replied, faster horses. We're a bit like that with systems. Generally, the current system was built on the assumption and business practices of the day. These may not even be relevant now, or they may not even exist. I worked on a project, which is, I think, still going, where even as they were working on it and engineering the project, the managers at the top were saying, we don't do any of this anymore in our business practice. Yet the whole software team of about 30 or 40 people was marching ahead to produce a web-based version of a Windows 3.1 application, and web-based. But most of what was going to go into that application wasn't even in their business process anymore. So they were wasting all this time and energy to build something that ultimately they didn't use in their business process. So 3 points to a successful project. There's probably 30 points to a successful project, but I've boiled it down to the 3 I think are relevant. So minimum viable product. I chose a wheel on purpose because a wheel is a minimum viable product. It's not a non-complex product. It's very difficult to make a bicycle wheel that actually works. It's a very challenging task, but you don't need any more than that. You don't need to put any special extras onto it. So in the minimum viable product, make sure you're building for version 1. No bells, no whistles. And by building to version 1, it kind of lends itself to an iterative approach, to an agile type approach. And an agile type approach to software development, if it's not pragmatic, it's probably necessary to do it because you may not fully, and invariably you don't understand the full scope of the problem. And more importantly, you probably find your customer doesn't know the full extent of the complexity of what they do, because they push a button and something happens, or they have a total in Excel, which when it goes to some other department, they do something magic with and it comes back ×2 or something, and all they think is it's ×2, and there's a whole process that goes on around that. You have to streamline it. A book is not a movie. And what I mean by that is a manual process, semi-automated process, is not an application solution. So the same way a book is not a movie, they create a screenplay from a book to make a movie. And in the same way, you probably need to take your business process and create a screenplay of that to actually make it work as an application from what you're doing at the moment. And much like a screenplay, certain parts of the original book are extended to make it work better, and some parts are shortened to make it run better, so that you have your 90-minute movie, to kind of push the analogy out to its... Yes, so I think that's an example of where, in my opinion, it goes wrong, but I think there has to be a balance, and you need to look at the business process and get your screenplay from that. So we don't want to boil oceans. We don't necessarily want a bigger boat. So engineers and architecting a project, so engineering and architecture have a tendency as technologists to over-engineer a problem. So they build in levels of redundancy to hardware that are not necessary. They try to abstract the problem to the nth degree. Multiple tier architecture, database partitioning and workflow, backbones, and you know, all sorts of things. The list goes on and on. If you're designing a system for 50 users, fair enough, design with the thing of 75 or 100 users. Don't design it with 1,000 users in mind. Hopefully that problem will present itself, but don't. Databases are really fast, really fast. Hardware is pretty cheap and reliable, and the cloud is your elastic friend. There are a few, obviously, patterns and practices you need to take into account when designing the software, so that you have the ability to scale up and scale out when necessary. But design right size, I think, is the term, as opposed to downsize or upsize. Right size the application for what you want to do. Don't try and think, well, potentially in 10 years' time I'll have 1,000 users or whatever. If you've only got 50, okay, double it. That's fine. You don't necessarily need to do it to the nth degree. And finally, you need a clear business goal. You need a simple business goal. You need to make sure your process is streamlined, simple software solution, and everybody needs to be on the same page. Thank you. Any questions?
Because I'm wondering, you talk about the Excel spreadsheets, and you know, we're all been in an instance where business have come along with the new process. They use Excel to document a number of items, keep a list of things, and even manage the project. And they hand that spreadsheet from one person to the next. Then over time, that becomes the process. So all the business rules tend to be in other people's minds, or on another page. Did you ever come across kind of challenges like that? How do you manage, or how do you get those requirements from the users?
So it's extremely difficult, and that's why I say it lends itself to agile. Essentially, the users don't necessarily know how complex the problem that they have is. As I said, to version data on a specific project that I was on, they had a notes field in Excel, and you'd think that's just, it was a note that they said on the stock or the share, whatever it was. And they had to version that note, so they had their line, and if they needed another note, they did an insert and put a line on that. But certain people could edit the line, and certain people couldn't edit the line. And certain people could only view it. Now, within the Excel spreadsheet, there wasn't much of that going on. So that was never conveyed in the initial spec, that different people had different access to creating, reading, viewing the notes, or changing or adding a note. But that was in the business process, and it just went on, and people just behaved themselves. So what was wanted in the application, that this, from a security perspective, was locked down. So Dan got one permission to read and write the note. Alistair could only read, except when some other condition occurred and somebody else had a... So that wasn't in the initial spec ever conveyed, but when it came to doing it, and the realization, I suppose, as well, that this is not Excel anymore, we're not in Kansas anymore, we can actually lock this thing down. They then started to want it. So as the process went on, there was a realization, oh, we can do this now that we didn't have before, but it was never spoken about up front, because they just, as I said, they literally handed it around, and the various people only saw it or got it at the time they could, and behaved themselves, for want of a better word.
What about people, they see a techie come in and start telling them that their business process is broken or won't work or something? There must be all kinds of issues around that.
So I don't know that you can tell them that it's broken, because I think then you'll have problems for sure. I think you have to carrot and stick. You have to kind of tease it out and kind of potentially ask them how do they think they could do this better? What things have they thought about over the years to do better that we could implement in the new solution? And maybe draw it out that way and look at the process and say, you're doing from A to B to C. With the computer now, we can go from A to C, or with Excel had to go through those three processes, but because... another example I have is Excel. Excel, they had to type in the customer number, and then they had to type the name. They had to go off to the AS400 system, type the number in, that was the name, go back there. Okay, so you had a blank field with a number, a blank field with a name. You can just say to them, we can connect directly to the AS400. When you type the number in, it'll bring the name in. I mean, that's maybe a trivial example, but there are lots of different things like that. But you have to be more carrot and stick rather than say this is nonsense.
Then testing it, like, obviously people have been using whether Excel or Lotus, etc., for years with a new system. How do you do the user acceptance testing? Is it different, or?
So user acceptance testing is again, it's very challenging, because it's not like, for anyone who's a programmer, it's not like NUnit or JUnit on that. And you can put those things in, but the business process is probably a long-running process that you can't put a unit test necessarily over it or thread it through, because there still may be different people in that workflow working on different parts that they have to know. So my experience of it is you have all your normal programming testing, and you have certain, I think the term is stories that you go through. But ultimately what they do is they tend to run in parallel for a certain period of time. They run the existing system and they run the new system. And obviously at the end of a month, the new system and the old system should tally. And if it doesn't, why doesn't it tally? And potentially after 3 iterations, it goes live with the new system and the old system is dropped. Depending on what your process is, most of the processes I'm involved in tend to be on a monthly cycle. Some of them are quarterly, but have been on a monthly cycle. So you do an end-of-month report, you check it against their Excel end-of-month report. If they tally, that's good. Let's do that again next month, and we can see the same things happening, and that's what they go through. And if an error occurs, depending on the severity, it dictates whether it locks it in just to, we'll fix that and we'll just continue on, or we have to roll back and we have another month added on to the user testing.
understand the complexity of their own process. When you're trying to build requirements for others through your own agile development, how can you create an accurate schedule? How can a project not go over?
It's challenging. I mean, you're right, because the users, a lot of the time, just don't know the complexity of it, because they see that they do this in Excel and it takes 5 minutes to do in Excel. And as I say, they may be one cog in the whole process. And people have been doing it for so long. It's like if I asked you, if you're changing gear in your car, explain the process, you really have to think about it, because it's such an automatic process for you to do that you don't realize there's probably about 5 different things you do before you change gear. You let the accelerator up, you push it down, you know, there's a whole process involved. And when people have been doing something for a long time, they don't even see it either. So until they get presented with the application, I heard a good method, but I don't know how practical it is in business, in big business processes, but is to do prototypes. So even if you can do a quick prototype of a screen, so that might take a week to do in this 12-month project, might take a week or a month to do, it's quite valuable, because the users then say, oh yes, I see that, and it's more, they need more visual cues to inform them of what's going on or what's necessary, and you can get a bit of feedback on that. That can help quite a bit, but you know, depending on what you're doing, how big a project it is. That's why I say you have to keep it really simple, really tight, really version 1, because there is a tendency to have very quickly scope creep by everybody, because maybe the first part of the project, you know, when you're setting up that initial screen or screens or reports, everyone says, oh, I can see the potential. That could go off to so-and-so. We could send a graph to there. Why don't we email that out to our customer? It all of a sudden it has to be, you have to be very harsh and say, this is what we've got. If you want any more, you've got to give us more. We're running to this screenplay, as I said, and that's going to give us our 90 minutes movie. Anything more, we're going over. Less, well, that's a different thing. But you want to get your screenplay and your spec as close to that and keep it as that. So as I say, maybe a prototype can help, you know, hone that a bit better.
It's a great memory. I mean, obviously things like Excel and Access are fairly flexible tools that we've known over whatever 30 years, so they have a flexibility built in. You know, when you go and implement an application, probably doesn't have that level of flexibility, or how do you put that level of flexibility in that allows for that learning or understanding?
So I think this goes back to the screenplay. So if I go back to the stocks and shares type example, I had an instance where a simple one line in the spreadsheet was stocks times price times quantity, just across, multiplied out. And for every share it was like that. So that's how you did the application. But on occasion, because of it was a special quarter or it was a particular trade or whatever, the calculation changed. You had to round it up instead of down. You had to do something slightly different. So in Excel, nobody realized this, because in Excel they just typed in the new equation or formula on that line, and that's it. And everything looked exactly the same except the number calculated. And somebody knew that this particular trade needed to be handled slightly different. So everyone's coding towards, you know, the simple x times y times z across, and then only at the end, when they're running the system, does somebody suddenly say, but that's wrong. And this is where the flexibility of Excel gets lost, and then you have to start putting in your if statement, or your business rule has to change. And those are really the gotchas, and there where it gets very, very tricky. And sometimes it can be better to say, no, this can't be done. You know, 99% of what you want to do is going to be done this way. It's going to run fine, perfectly. We'll get it done in the time frame. That's that 1% that we can't fulfill. That's going to take us another same amount of time as the first project to implement it in the way that they do it in Excel. And it may be, again, another tough discussion about whether this facility should be, and maybe it's not that it shouldn't ever be in the application, but it shouldn't be in version 1 of the application.
Okay. Thank you very much, David.
No problem.
Slides up here. Oh, you have your memory stick. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Alistair. What's that? Oh, that's version 10 actually. Yeah, on the money. So, hi, my name is Dan Galavan. I'm a business intelligence consultant. I've been working with data since 1999. Been working with enterprise databases since St. Patrick's Day 2003. Now, you might be thinking, St. Patrick's Day databases, has this guy got a life? But it was actually, I was working in Germany at the time, and for some reason St. Patrick's Day isn't a national holiday there. So I'm going to take you through the journey that is business process automation, and whether it's worth all the hassle, or are you better off mining bitcoins. So a little bit more about me. I've worked with database design, development, optimization, report design, development, optimization, ETL design, development, optimization in a variety of business areas. Health services, social services, banking, fund management, CRM, telecoms, and others. But before I go on, I'd like to ask a little bit about you. Have you worked with databases before? Hands up. Don't be shy. Oh, good. Have you delivered reports before? Okay. Have you mined Bitcoin before? We're all in very good company. So, process automation, the pros and cons. So, pros, visualizations, performance. The theory is data at your fingertips. Full-time employee savings, so you free people up rather than having to collect data, aggregate it, build reports, and manual reports and so on. They have time to focus on other tasks. Improves data quality and self-service, so you're empowering the end user. Cons, as David alluded to, it's difficult. Business process automation is difficult. In a lot of ways, you're going into the unknown. For a lot of customers, sure, there's similar projects may have been done in the past, but you're going off-road. You may be going where no man has gone before. It can be expensive. The skill set needed for business process automation can be, at times, niche. The software licensing can be pricey, and the infrastructure can be pricey. And as David mentioned, it's risky business. Projects can fail. I was talking to someone just last week who had to can a whole business intelligence project because they weren't getting any results and they ran out of budget. So inputs. What do you need for business process automation? We need a strategy. Where are you going with this? Short term and long term, you need a roadmap. Short term, maybe you want to automate your sales reporting, and that's going to lead on to purchases, general ledger. And at the end of the roadmap, the long-term strategy is that your business users can run whatever reports they need to themselves. You need a sponsor. This is the most critical part of business intelligence, business process automation. You need someone on site, someone within the business who's going to buy into what you're delivering and encourage the people there to buy into what you're delivering, because you will need their support. You'll need the business user support to collect requirements. You'll need the business user support for user acceptance testing at the end. And I was talking to someone else last week who had 2 cases of projects failing because they got the requirements right, they got the delivery right, but nobody was using it, so it was classed as a failure. Stakeholders. These are the guys who have something to get out of this. So who are going to be getting the reports or whatever, the dashboards. Scope. This is really important. As David mentioned in the Q&A session, try and limit your scope, especially with version 1, with a proof of concept. The smaller the scope, the better chance you have of success. So requirements. As David mentioned, stories. Agile uses the user stories approach. I was on a project about 2 years back, and we used actually questionnaires to gather user requirements. So what's the report supposed to do? When's it supposed to run? What are the filters? Who should have access to it? Chinese proverb. Don't be afraid to ask questions. You might feel silly at first, but it pays off long term. You've got to get the requirements straight up front. If you don't get the requirements right up front, you're feeding into the risk of the project failing. But what will most likely happen is the developers are going to be working long hours trying to pick up on that. And the testers are going to be working long hours. So requirements is where it's at. It's the foundation. There's an example of a questionnaire. You need data governance. So what is data governance? It's everything to do with data in your business. How the data comes in, who has access to it, who can change it, who can view it. Maybe you're going to need to include master data, so reference data. You're going to need a data steward to look after that. You need a project plan. But don't get too attached to it. As the project rolls on, it's probably going to change. So question, how many days should it take to deliver a report? Any ideas?
Hours.
Huh?
Hours. Depends if the first one or the last report.
Yeah, there are a lot of factors involved, but if you have to come up with a number up front, minimum 3 days. By the time you get the requirements, mock up with design, check it, sign it off with the user, get your test data together, end-to-end testing, user acceptance testing, and sign off. It's going to be at least 3 days. So delivery. Resources. You need good people. You need people who understand the tools that you're using to deliver. And you need people with communication skills. I know of a case, there's a colleague I'm working with at the moment, and he gets on like a house on fire with the customer. They want to chat with him all the time, how's his weekend and so on. I know of another case where a guy was on site. He called the customer into a room and said, "You're doing everything wrong." He didn't use the carrot approach that David referred to. Customer said, "Okay, leave and don't come back." So you need people with people skills. And you need people who are going to be prepared to keep their skills sharpened. As Oscar Wilde said, "I'm not young enough to know everything." Trust. You need to build trust with the customer early on, and the way to do that is to deliver. Design. Gap analysis. I was on a project a few years back where I was charged with delivering reports, and it was a billing system, and there was a semantic reporting layer on top of that billing system. So I was given the requirements. I had to do a gap analysis to make sure, well, can this semantic layer deliver those reports? It took about a year to get those gaps closed. Data modeling. You're going to start with your conceptual model, high-level customer, product, sales, for example. Push it down to the logical iteration. You're going to add in columns. So a customer has an address, a product has a color. And then you're going to go a step further with the physical model. Plenty of data modeling tools out there. Irwin, data modeler, Sybase Power Designer. You can, I'm sure you've all seen, you can forward engineer, reverse engineer. Database, design for databases. I have a soft spot for that one because in 2004 I was charged with developing an online CRM application using the LAMP infrastructure, so Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP. And at the time it was the only one that would actually forward engineer into MySQL. So you need a tool set obviously is going to match your own requirements. Data profiling. You want to see what's the situation with the data that you're going to be using, okay? So whether it's from, as the documentation says, disparate data sources. Why can't they just say different data sources? I was on a data migration project where one of the key things was the customer's RSI number, and we were able to use data profiling to see straight uploads. There's a lot of gaps here. And actually that project was in education as regards different priorities, because there was an SME taking us through the business side, the legacy systems, which he had built himself over years. So he was the only guy who really knew what was going on. And the data migration was going quite slowly. He was drip feeding us information because he wanted the data profiling to complete, get his legacy system spick and span. We eventually got the job done, but you have to manage, obviously have to manage things like that as well. Data dictionary. Sometimes I wonder do these actually exist. But I was dealing with a customer recently where I requested a data dictionary to support data feeds we were getting, and they took exception to that. But eventually drip fed the information by email, so we were able to build our own. But it's quite useful. Data quality, again, can you trust your data? Traceability. Where did the data come from? Who's changed it last? So data lineage is ideal for that. So we have a customer actually where normally it load rows into a database and there's unique identifiers to say, oh, yeah, this is a new row, or I've loaded it before. But in this case, there was no uniqueness in the files. We could only get it down to about 5 rows of uniqueness. So what we had to do was go into the source file and tag each row in the source file. So at least we could say, yeah, this row in the database came from this part in the file, because if you're loading rows that don't have a unique identifier, it might not be, the rows might not load in the same order that they're in the file. And patterns. There's plenty of design patterns out there to help you if you're starting for the first time or starting with a new piece of technology. One that I've seen is with ETL packages. They can really turn into a sprawl. And you could have maybe 50, 60, 70, 80 packages. And there was actually the case where you had 10 packages, a master package, and all different silos. And then you had a master packages calling those. And there was one package that called them all, and that was called Ultimate Master. Now, if you had used design patterns in that case, you could have called all the packages with one package. pass in a variable and loop it. But so design patterns, there's a lot of value in those. There's ultimate master. So delivery platform. You've decided you want to automate your processes. What platform are you going to use? Source systems, relational. Maybe there's master data. Maybe there's FTP files. These are probably the biggest headache. Well, they all have their own headaches, but this one, I've seen files come in with no column headers. I've seen files that are comma separated, and that's probably the worst delimiter you can have. No sooner do you get a comma separated file, comma delimited file, and someone's going to put a comma in an address field, and it's going to corrupt the whole file. Semicolons are almost as bad. You get into tabs. I've seen cases where tabs have been put into cells. I don't know how they've managed that. And we had to actually translate the ASCII code of the value to see actually what was going on. Your best bet is pipe delimited. And if you're naming files, obviously, it's got to be, if it's date stamped, it's 4Ys, DD. I got files about 2 months ago. 16 years worth of transactional data over a large number of files, and they were named why would people do that? Anyway, it happens. ETL, so loading your data marts, or a lot of data, data marts or a data warehouse or both. Your semantic layer, so your layer of abstraction. Self-service BI, report server, and so on. Now, ad hoc reporting. Rather than doing Bitcoin mining, you can use that to do your data mining, or as it's called these days, analytics. And you're probably going to need a statistician. Someone's going to plug in their R application in MATLAB. And the ideal, that elusive, single version of the truth. Very briefly, data warehouse versus data mart. There's been a debate going on for the last 20 years between the Bill Inman camp and the Ralph Kimball camp. So Inman takes the approach, it's the full Monty, it's the big bang. Your enterprise data warehouse is going to have everything in it, okay? It's top down. It's quite normalized. I don't know if that's propaganda from the Kimball camp, but there is a relatively high rate of failure because you're taking a bigger risk. Kimball, the dimensional model is more intuitive for the end users. Bottom up, lower risk, easier integration. As the US General Abrams said, if you're eating an elephant, one bite at a time, you want to manage the risk. Delivery platforms, if you're looking to make your decision, a good source is the Gartner quadrant, the Gartner Magic Quadrant. And they look at different aspects of what functionality should be in a business intelligence platform. So scorecards, business dashboards, reports, support, ad hoc support, mobile support. If you're looking for a vendor, you ideally want to get up into the leaders quadrant right here. Of course, there's licensing costs associated with that. But if you're starting from scratch, this is a good starting point. One of the biggest data houses in Ireland are using ClickView, but what they found is with the latest version, ClickView's changed everything and they're actually looking to move away. They can't use it like they want to. So you've got to be conscious of the roadmap as well. Another thing is, for example, with the Microsoft Analysis Services offering, you've got your traditional MDX offering versus a tabular model. Tabular model is new. So why have they got two? And if you look a bit more closely, what no one is saying is there's been no changes to the traditional MDX model since SQL 2005, and there's been 2008, 2002, 2012, 2014. So it's going nowhere. So you have to be conscious of the roadmap of whatever vendor or vendors you're choosing. Best practice guidelines, well worth spending time looking at. All the vendors will have that, or most of them will. I was just going to say that, yeah. So we're just going to take a quick...
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, managing delivery. You want to do whatever it takes to manage the risk because of overruns and whatnot. Keeping tabs on things. Simple things like weekly updates. Agile uses something called Moscow prioritization, which I'm a fan of. So you're getting buy-in from the user to decide what goes into the next sprint. And Moscow prioritization, M must have, S should have. If there's a plan B to go with that, C could have, W, it's not going to be in this release. And the O and the O are to make the word pronounceable. RAID logs, very simple but very useful. Manage your risks, assumptions, as long as you validate the assumptions, your issues. These are the things that are going wrong, and your dependencies. Focus. I was doing a UAT for an application front end a few years back, and I tested, gone through everything all morning to make sure that this demo was going to work. The 2 users were around my desk, and there was a third-party vendor as well because his data was feeding into the system. What happened? The demo didn't work. And the third-party vendor threw his rattle out of the pram. He said, I don't have time for this. Made special effort to get in here for this. Wasting my time. He upset the 2 testers and myself as well. And I also learned that the more people looking at a demo, the higher the chance that it's not going to work. So I left work that evening quite frustrated at how things had worked out, and I gave it a lot of thought, slept on it, and I realised, well, what is my focus here? What do I need to get done? And I realised, well, the third-party vendor who was upsetting the whole apple cart, well, he didn't actually have to be there, okay? I didn't need him to be in on the demo to get signed off on the report or on the application, because that's what I needed. So I arranged it again. The next demo worked. Note there were less people watching it. And I realized, okay, if I keep focusing on what I need to deliver, that's going to help. 2 weeks later, the same third-party vendor crashed into the IT department where I was at the time. Seinfeld? When Kramer dashes in, he's like, dashes in, there's a problem with the system. And I asked him, what's up? And he described what he thought was the problem. And I said, hang on a sec, there's something there that you mightn't understand, but you can't say that's a problem. And once I focused on the issue at hand rather than his upsetness and trying to calm him down, I realized, okay, I can manage this. So focus is quite useful. Plus, if people are asking you to do things that aren't part of what you're trying to get done, it's always good to, what's my focus here? What am I trying to deliver? Standards, coding standards, comment your code, variables, I know straightforward stuff. Scope creep. Again, David referred to this earlier. These are the little things, the little gremlins that increase the risk of your project failing. I saw a case about a month ago where a colleague of mine was working with his computer, working on his deliverables, working on his focus. Customer barges in, a bit like Kramer again. Hey, I've got this data in the system, could you put it together for me, send it on? And the consultant responded, yeah, okay. Maybe what he should have done was said, kind of come back to him in the middle of something. Maybe what he should have done was said, it's there, but it's going to take a bit of time. He put the data together, sent it on to the customer. 1 month later, the customer complained. He said, where's my monthly data? If you find yourself in a situation where you're being asked to do something that's not part of the spec, and you need to be clear on the requirements, and the requirements, as I referred to earlier, need to be good, change requests. Where you say up front, if this needs to be done, like David said, I need more time here. It's going to take 4 days. And whoever is calling the shots on the client side will say, 4 days, now that's a lower priority, park that for now. So you're keeping things on track. The larger the project, the more likely you're going to get to that. So I was in a replan meeting about 6 weeks ago, actually, where we started off about 6 months ago on our business process automation journey. And we're all in high spirits and all enthusiastic, and then about 6 weeks ago, the wheels had all fallen off. So we're sitting around in a meeting wondering what's going on. Well, we knew what had happened. There'd been a lot of stuff that we hadn't expected, like major data quality issues. So there was a data supplier that had said, we'll supply this data, it's all cool. We've got our data checks, the data's cool, everything's cool. The data came in. They also supplied details of the data checks they were doing. So we loaded the data. We actually applied those data checks on our site. Turns out the data sets were like Swiss cheese. And at least we spotted them then rather than further down the work stream when they were showing up in reports. So all these things have a knock-on effect. Everything, you need to really keep an eye on things. And sign off. Sign off documentation. As long as you can give the customer what's required or what they can work with and get their agreement, that's really important, because this is going to tie back to billing. And sailing off into the sunset, process support documentation. Maybe you need drawdown days. Something, because things need to keep ticking over. Maybe the customer can take ownership of this themselves. Maybe you need to train the trainer. Take one person in the business, get them up to speed on what needs to be done to keep things going, and then he can share his skills. So there's some examples of the value of business intelligence. So here's a case study of a customer not far from here actually, where they're spending a lot of time acquiring data, a lot of time putting it in a format that they can report on, a lot of time putting together manual reports in Excel and Access and so on. So they were more or less the metrics. You see, the biggest is actually getting the data. Once we put in our data warehouse and automated the processes, this was the output. Very little time spent on all this stuff, putting data together and so on. There's still the odd data quality issue and data suppliers and whatnot. Analysis and decision making. But we all know what really happens is when FTEs get this free time, they're given something else to do. But it does make things more efficient. Right. You've gone on your business process automation journey, and you've gone through a lot of stuff, and you've managed a lot of risks and whatnot. Is it worth it? Are you better off mining Bitcoin? According to Bloomberg, revenue from Bitcoin in blockchain, should I say, it was at 25.2 million, right? In April of this year, it's dropped to 14.9 million. It's getting more difficult to mine Bitcoins, which is part of the whole Bitcoin algorithm. The idea behind it is actually to minimize the risk of inflation within the currency. So the margins are dropping, okay? Another thing you need to consider if you're going to mine Bitcoin is your CapEx and your OpEx, your capital expenditure, investment in your mining rig. A big operational expense with Bitcoin mining is actually electricity costs. It takes a lot of electricity to mine Bitcoins to the point where you're going to make money. So at this stage, with the margins dropping, it's quite a barrier to the Joe Soap getting into Bitcoin mining. So for the high-end Bitcoin miners, there's still money to be made, but it's becoming less, and it's becoming more difficult, and it's becoming more expensive. You see places in the States actually that are turning into bit mining towns because people are heading to the States with the cheapest electricity. Major thefts. Mt. Gox. Have you heard of Mt. Gox? Bitcoin exchange in Japan. Suddenly stopped trading a few months back. After about 2 months of different things happening, like going into receivership and mentions of fraud and whatnot, $500 million worth of Bitcoins went missing. Now, the theory behind Bitcoin is it's supposed to be able to prevent fraud, but this is a case where it didn't happen. And that's not just 100 million or 30 million, it's $500 million, okay? So you go to all the effort of mining your Bitcoin, and then something like this happens, okay? Silk Road is another example. If you're on Silk Road, whatever works. You're buying other things. So the likes of Mt. Gox are saying, yeah, it's not our fault, but who really knows what happened to the bitcoins? So CapEx, OpEx. Bloomberg, if you invest $3,500 in a mining rig, you can expect 20 euros worth of bitcoins for every $17. Sorry, $20 of bitcoin for every $17 of electricity you use. And that's obviously dropping from last December, okay? If you have your mind set on mining online currencies, there's a second option. Litecoin. So it's a newer online currency, and according to Bloomberg, $25 worth of Litecoin can be mined for $3 a day, right? Forget Bitcoin. If you really want to get into online currency mining, Litecoin. But what none of this will do will let you know what's going on in your business, who's selling what, what's selling, what's not selling, and if you move into analytics, why is it selling or not selling? You won't get the inside info. You won't get the insight to what's going on in your business. So for me, it's business process automation. Sure, there is a risk involved, but if you manage it right, there's a lot of long-term benefits. So to summarize, because in presentations you're supposed to summarize at the end, strategy and scope, data governance, and incidentally, data stewarding or master data is part of this, and master data is a right headache. Master data is probably the one part of the delivery where, so you're telling the customer, yeah, I'm going to give you these reports and this is going to happen, it's going to be great, and they're saying great. All I have to do is log in, click this, apply these filters, and I get my data. Master data isn't like that. You need a data governor on the inside, someone who owns the data or someone who understands it. And the conversation changes slightly because now you're saying to the customer, you have to do something. You have to take ownership. And it's a bit more, it's not as straightforward. And this ties back into you need a strong sponsor for your project.
And you were working on a project where two business owners were doing reporting, and the length of the weekend was different depending who you spoke to. Some people started at 5 o'clock in the evening, at 9 in the morning on Monday, and others that started at midnight, going through to midnight.
Yes. And this particular customer is what David alluded to, where they were doing all their business in Excel. They were managing millions of funds and investments through Excel. We switched it all into a data warehouse solution. Resources. You need good people. You need people with the skills, and as I said, there's an expense there, potentially. And you need people that are going to get on with people, people that connect with people, build the trust, and just people with people skills. Requirements gathering. User stories, questionnaires, whatever it takes to nail down the requirements early on. Vendor platform. Gartner Magic Quadrant is a great starting point if you want to get up to speed on what's what. Tracking and delivery. So again, the Moscow prioritization, I'm a fan of that, and RAID logs, they're quite simple, but they're quite useful. Testing and sign-off. So testing can be user acceptance testing, end-to-end testing. If you put data in this end, well, something specific should come out the other end. Systems integration testing. Remember that slide where I had lots of different disparate data sources? You want to make sure they all integrate with your solution. So there's your system integration testing and process automation. So that is a summary of business process automation, except that. And that represents your contingency. That represents the stuff you don't know is going to go wrong yet, but something generally will go wrong. As the marketeer A.C. Nielsen said, the price of light, the cost of light is less than the price of darkness, or the other way around. So use business process automation to see what's going on inside your business and have that information at your fingertips. So some resources. Mike 2.0. It's an open source methodology It's a methodology for information knowledge environments. Is that right, Alistair? Yeah. And I can't speak highly enough of this. If you find yourself in a position where you have to do a data profiling exercise or master data implementation or something information management oriented for the first time, Mike is a great source. So I'd be from the Kimball camp as regards data warehouse implementations, smaller pieces, data marts. Data warehousing toolkit is a good book. Data warehousing lifecycle. Training and certification. As Oscar Wilde said, I'm not young enough to think I know everything. You're going to have to keep up to speed with what's going on, and if you want to keep in the delivery side of business process automation. Safari books online. Great source of information. $39 a month, I'm not sure what that is in euros, will give you access to a lot of books and a lot of videos. Thank you. Questions?
You've obviously worked with a lot of different clients. What's the most difficult challenge?
Two things come to mind. The first, actually three things come to mind. One of the most difficult things I found was when I began working with data, it was one project for 6 months at a time, maybe a year at a time. And I eventually found myself working for a consultancy firm where maybe I was working with one client on site in the morning and a different client in the afternoon. And the morning might have been a business intelligence implementation, and the afternoon might have been a disaster recovery implementation. And I found that really difficult. I found that I really had to manage my time and be quite prepared, because I felt like my mind was being torn apart, actually. It's like multitasking, and that's not straightforward, right? Second example is I moved on to an enterprise billing project, and previous to that, I had been the big fish in the small pond. Database server, admin access. If I needed to load a file, I could load it. If I needed to change something, I could just do it. And with smaller projects, you have a better chance of understanding the full picture. I suddenly found myself on quite a large, well, relatively large project, 40 staff, all the work streams running at the same time. Requirements gathering was running at the same time as development, as testing, and my work stream, which was report development. And I found it really difficult because I no longer had the run of the show, and I really had to manage my own dependencies. And that's what you have to do. You have to work out what are my risks, what do I need to get my job done. It got to the point actually where to get test data to see if my reports worked, I had to get one of the bill testing guys to frig some failed payments. Just 2 rows. 2 rows were enough to test the reports. And actually that same project, I had one of my most difficult jobs, which was to get an age debt billing reconciliation report to work. Have you ever had to get a billing system to add up? Especially when it's on a test system, you've got data quality issues. That was not easy. But what I did was I just picked some example customers and followed them the whole way through, and that really helped to see what was going on. And we were able to narrow down the gaps between the age debt buckets versus the reconciliation, which would have been what would have fed into the age debt buckets, like invoices, payments, failed payments, returns, discounts, and so on. And there was actually rounding issues within the system. Not issues, but it was a rounding functionality, actually. So, yeah, what can you do?
How did you do it? You talked about moving from being a big fish in small ponds to small fish in big ponds. How did you do to make it less fractionated amounts? Do you do courses or do anything that you read?
Well, you definitely have to manage the stress levels. Okay, so that's in the evening times. You've got to switch off. Go do whatever it takes. Go for a swim. And that might sound like obvious stuff, but when you're on a project like that, it can really get on top of you. And you do need to manage your time. You do need to be focused on, again, what do you have to deliver here? And what do you need to get that done? and you really have to track your own deliverables. And if someone is holding you up, you actually have to flag that. So, for example, I remember plenty of Friday afternoon status meetings where the pressure was on me, and I had to be prepared and say, right, well, I can't do this because of this. And if you escalate, you have a chance of it being closed off, actually. You have a chance of your dependencies being met. You have no choice. You have to escalate. That's what you have to do. It took time.
I was in a project a couple of months ago in dashboards for education, English, C, back in Brazil. I was at the BA there long, but there was this BI person helping me to do most of the lines. And it was so much into constructing the final view before we could start playing with the data here. And a perspective, a BI project is more visual. You have to decide done all the way through before you get started the work with data. Do you see that way as well? Do you see that the final view has to be created, blueprinted since the very beginning as well?
If you could get to that point, yeah, I would say so. Manage the requirements up front, because if you have a clear picture of what you need to deliver, well, then you can say, right, I'm going to need this, this, and this to deliver that. We might need to do a subset. If it's difficult to see the end point, then a proof of concept is the way to go. We'll weed out a lot of those issues early on. But definitely I would say it is important to see the end picture, but it doesn't have to be polished. And part of what will help you to see the end picture is understanding the business. Again, back to good people. You need people who understand the business, subject matter experts, whether they're internal, business analysts, or yourself. And the best way to get up to speed on a business is to be on site and immerse yourself in that. So, for example, you've got a client talking to you about gross asset value, net asset value, umbrellas, fund classes, total expense ratio, and whatnot. You're going to need to be able to handle that. Or maybe they're more focused on average revenue per user, churn, usage. Or maybe they're obsessed with LTV versus collateral. So while you might not need an end picture, it's quite useful to have a pretty good end picture and understand what is going on in the business and have a better idea of what you need to do to get it done. What often happens is the customer sees the output at the end and they think, well, it doesn't look that complicated. They don't see all the effort that went into getting it to that point. And what often happens as well when they see an output for the first time, because oftentimes customers aren't sure what the system is supposed to do until they do see that. And when you show them a report, you can expect within 2 sentences the scope creep is going to start creeping in. You show them the report and go, wow, that's pretty cool. Could you just add this column here? Could you just do this, that, the other? And you have to be pragmatic. Maybe it is easy, but adding an extra column, there could be a lot of work behind that. So you have to call it as it happens. Does that answer your question?
You mentioned the kind of 3 days average for doing a report. Obviously, the sales guy, we've shown something, it takes 5 minutes. What's the difference between like a report that takes a half a day to a report that takes a week? What's the thing that drives it up? Is it the formatting of the report or the data quality?
There's a few parts. It is data quality. It is what the report is supposed to look like. But the first thing for me is what's in place already. As I mentioned earlier, I was on a project where all the work streams were running at the same time, right? Common sense might dictate that you do the database first. You put the data in first. You put the front end on first. And when all that's done and dusted, then you start building the reports, right? And if that's the case, maybe you can get it down less than 3 days. But if you have to do the full Monty of analysis, signing off the mock-ups and whatnot, and unit testing yourself and getting it through end-to-end. So, for example, you'll have a separate test team that's looking after that, but they're going to send back bugs and you're going to have to deal with that. The time can really add up. And as you said as well, formatting. What's to be delivered with the report. And then you're getting into managing scope, right? So I was on a project where the scope had been managed earlier, and this for me was a lifesaver, okay? The architect had said, right, we're going to deliver these reports, these 70 reports, but they're going to be minimal. They're going to be tabular. There's going to be no logos. There's going to be no charts, because they can often be the ones that consume all the time. And there's going to be no drill downs, and it's going to be tabular, and there's going to be filters, but that's it. And so this kind of scope management limited things as well, like OLAP cubes. But what it did was ensure, it might sound militant, but it actually gave us a better chance of delivering it. It's actually Alistair that came up with the scope.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Help from my friends.
Yeah. That was a lifesaver. That saved me a lot of time, a lot of hassle as well, actually.